Some games are meant to be experienced in bite-sized chunks, and some can give you tons of worthwhile stuff to do. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRanx, 10 games worth spending 1,000 hours in. Starting off with number 10, it's No Man's Sky. Whenever anybody talks about No Man's Sky, they always have to kick things off with the standard preamble. The game was very disappointing when it launched, but the developers managed to turn it around. You know the whole story. You've probably heard it 100 times already. I mean, we made not only a good video about what was wrong with it when it came out, but we also made a good video about how they turned it around. The game's been out for years, and at this point, it's been good much longer than it's been bad. The team's been giving the game consistent and substantial updates for years now, and it's all been free the entire time. What started out as a relatively bare-bones, procedurally generated space exploration sandbox has turned into a game with so much to do in it that you could easily spend thousands of hours playing it. And although it's still not the most mechanically complex game out there, it's a fantastic experience to chill out in, explore, build a base, play a role. It's one of those great worlds to inhabit, even if a lot of the mechanical things are relatively simple. It's not the bad kind of simple. And number 9 is Warhammer Total War. Pretty much all the Total War games are the best kinds of time vacuums. It's so easy to lose hours playing these things. But at least in my opinion, the Total War game that really steals the hours out of the day is Warhammer Total War. Based on the old world Warhammer universe, these games have long campaigns, a metric ton of unique and fun to play armies, and an all-around insane amount of content, especially if you've got all 3 games, which unlocks the ridiculous Immortal Empires campaign that combines all 3 maps from all 3 games into one massive campaign. Throw in all the fun alternate campaign modes for certain races and generals, and the many different ways you can play as each race, and it's easy to imagine spending hundreds, if not thousands of hours with these games. The general consensus is that Warhammer 2 is the best one, and if you just want one game to spend a ton of time in, that's probably your best bet. But in general gameplay, all 3 games are about equal in quality, so there's just little changes made here and there that bug people, or in some cases, people actually really like. But speaking of, the 3rd game is still pretty buggy. Another hurdle is that getting into these games has a price. Like I said, Immortal Empires is huge, but if you want to play, you gotta have all 3 games, and the 3rd one still isn't going on sale, so that's probably gonna be full price on top of all the DLC, and a lot of it's really, really good, but it's also really damn expensive when you add it all up. At number 8 is Monster Hunter World. If tactics and strategy isn't your thing, you're more into action, then you really can't go wrong with Monster Hunter World, an action game all about grinding. Like, the series is literally all about grinding, and if you're obsessive enough, then you can spend a whole hell of a lot of time with it if you really want to. Just finishing the main campaign can easily take over 100 hours, and that's just scratching the surface. There's always something like a new set of armor or a weapon upgrade that'll keep you going, but unlocking this stuff can feel like a merciless grind on top of being incredibly challenging when you're getting into the end game. But for a certain type of player, there's a high skill ceiling combined with a gear chase, and it can be exhilarating. It just depends on who you are. There's more than enough content to keep you playing for thousands of hours, but you gotta be willing to suffer a few setbacks here and there. To get to the really high rank stuff, it requires some serious dedication, but when you finally get the required crafting materials to upgrade your equipment to the next stage, you immediately see its effects in the next hunt, and you can see why it's such an addictive gameplay loop. And number 7 is Path of Exile. There are plenty of action RPGs you can play hundreds, if not thousands of hours in. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if I've logged at least 1,000 in Diablo 2, just from playing it so many times over the years. But in terms of content complexity and constant updates that keep players coming back, you really can't top Path of Exile. Big thing here is that this one's free to play, and it doesn't have any of the attempts to bilk people that free games often have. All the stuff you can buy is specifically only cosmetic. The only thing a serious player would probably actually want to spend some money on is to expand their stash so they can share equipment between multiple characters. The thing that keeps Path of Exile players on board, outside of the ridiculously complex skill tree, which you can spend hours on just thinking about your character build, is the constant updates. The devs have been super consistent, following a 3-month update schedule for years now, and the amount of stuff they've added to the game is almost overwhelming. This stuff is primarily endgame, so you probably won't be aware of it the first 100 or so hours, but it's a big part of what keeps players, well, playing. It's a game that rewards dedicated players like few others. It requires a lot to get into, especially for an action RPG, but if you enjoy crunching numbers and collecting loot, Path of Exile is probably right up your alley. Or it could send you away, running, screaming at the top of your lungs if you take one look at that skill tree and don't want it, if you just nope out right there. It does have that effect on a certain type of person. And number 6 is RimWorld, billed as a narrative engine. RimWorld is just as much about the stories that you can tell as much as it is about the gameplay. It's a heady mix of Dwarf Fortress and The Sims with an added sci-fi twist that makes the game very easy to get lost in. Don't let its very basic visuals fool you. The game has a ton of depth. It's not quite as deep as something like Dwarf Fortress, but the potential for chaos and storytellers might be even higher here than in that game. RimWorld is a colony survival game that's as much about keeping your people happy and comfortable as it is about building a sustainable settlement. Most of the time these things spiral into chaos, but even when things are going well, there's always kind of an air of uncertainty with your little NPCs. Characters can snap in an instant and go on a killing spree, or become a drug kingpin when you're not looking. All kinds of crazy stuff can happen, and so much of the entertainment of the game comes from these wild swings away from what is supposed to happen. There's a ton of content to experience from the base game, and so much so that the few DLCs aren't even really necessary. Oh yeah, and I can't forget the many huge game-changing mods there are out there as well. RimWorld is a game that can take a little bit of effort to get into and fully understand, but once it clicks, it's really a game that you can spend tons of time with. And number 5 is Crusader Kings / Europa Universalis. Really just the Paradox Grand Strategy games. Everybody has a different idea about which Paradox Grand Strategy game is their favorite, so I'm just going to say all of them. The most popular seem to be Crusader Kings 2 and Europa Universalis 4, and they're certainly the biggest, just counting the metric ton of expansion packs and add-ons they have. But really any of these games will do, with one big word of warning. If you thought RimWorld looked impenetrable, run away from these games. They're massive strategy games with some of the most complicated and dynamic game worlds out there, and you could be anybody in these games. To a lowly duke with a small territory, to a king of a world-spanning empire, it's all under your control to the smallest detail. These games are really daunting to get into, and even veterans struggle with certain aspects of the game, but what makes them so playable is that you never actually have to do anything. There's no end goal, you just pick a year and a sovereign and you're off. It doesn't matter if you win or lose, so it's really up to the player to set goals for themselves, and that's what a lot of the fun of these games really comes from. Like creating ridiculous ahistorical scenarios through pure force of will, or playing as inconsequential characters trying to survive, it's all there. You can start in the lowest position and scheme your way into making your family into the new sovereigns or undermine a country from within. It's another game about stories, and while the intrigues you can set up are depicted fairly abstract, like seriously, sometimes you really have to think about what's supposed to be going on sometimes, but the way generally things play out feel like you're messing around in a pretty real and reactive world. Paradox games are complicated as hell, but you don't actually have to learn anything. Sometimes it's actually more fun to fail than it is to succeed. Beware though, this is another of those games that can be expensive to get into. There's tons of DLC, and a lot of it is considered essential. At number 4 is Fallout 4. Interesting thing about this game is that while the core game is really long with a lot to do, it's not one of those games you'd be able to spend 1,000 hours playing unless you get into the settlement stuff. Don't get me wrong, the entire Boston Commonwealth it's massive, there's tons to explore, but the thing that keeps players coming back is the extensive crafting and construction system where you can build your own settlement. People have built some really ridiculous stuff with this system. Not exactly Minecraft, mind you. There is a limit to what you can eventually build, but if you're playing on PC, it's trivially easy to mod and just go as crazy as you want. People have built entire new towns with this system. They've constructed massive structures and devised these crazy elaborate Rube Goldberg machines with the game's physics. All this stuff can be done with the base game, and it's easy to dump hundreds of hours into it without even thinking, if you really want to go nuts. However, like I said, take a look at the game's extensive modding scene. It's been tweaking and making improvements to Fallout 4 for years now. I mean, it's par for the course with pretty much every Bethesda game. Fallout 4 is a game that's designed to get lost in, and it's crazy with the amount of stuff that's just there, as well as what you can factor in with mods. There's so much to do in this game. At number 3 is Final Fantasy XIV. For me, if you're going to get into an MMO right now and really want to sink your teeth into one, this is probably the one to play. People probably know that I'm a big Final Fantasy nut, but this has got a massive story campaign, tons of raids, tons of dungeons, lots of time-wasting side activities, and just a huge world to explore. It's a game that's been going strong for so long that its original disastrous incarnation is basically an afterthought. Nobody really cares how it launched because the current game is so damn solid. It still has issues. People generally didn't love the newest expansion as much as some of the previous ones, and the housing situation's still kind of a mess. But as far as MMORPGs go, these are kind of minor issues in the grand scheme. This is another game that's not super cheap to get into, though. On top of the cost of the game and the multiple expansions, there's also a monthly fee you gotta pay. And yeah, there is a free-to-play version, but it's more like a demo than the full experience. So for people wanting to spend hundreds of hours in the game, you're gonna have to drop some serious cash for this one to get everything. But I will also say, if there's a case for the monthly fee version of an MMO, it's Final Fantasy XIV. Like, there's just so much to get into, and all I ever hear is how welcoming and positive the community is. I may be wrong about it these days, but that's the impression I've always gotten from it. If you're the type to get into MMOs, Final Fantasy XIV is just top-notch. At number 2 is Stardew Valley. Sometimes when you turn on a game, you're not looking for intense action or in-depth strategy, you just want something chill to veg out to, and few games do that as good as Stardew Valley. Like, I'd put it in the same tier as games like Farming Simulator, American Truck Simulator, except it has a really charming pixel art style. It's a farming simulator, pretty abstract version of farming though, where you can pretty much grow whatever you want. There's a big focus on building relationships, expanding your farm, and a surprising amount of exploration you can do. It seems like a small game, but like with Binding of Isaac, it's a game that's been getting updated for many years now, and there's so much additional content and goals that'll keep you playing for a really long time. It's a perfect, easygoing game to play, whether or not you're fully engaged with it. Everyone's got to have at least one game they turn on, just take it easy, and Stardew's probably one of my favorites. And finally, at number 1, it's Factorio. This top-down factory building game is one of the most satisfying and addictive games out there. It's the ultimate Tetris effect game where you turn it on just to play for a few minutes and you look up and it's the break of dawn. Basics, super simple. You're on a hostile planet. You gotta build a factory, including defenses. What makes it so satisfying is the factory. Everything is connected by cables, conveyor belts, and there's just something really fulfilling to just watch your factory chug away. And while it starts off small and simple, the complexity ratchets up to almost baffling levels. Like, just look at some of the factories people have managed to build. This stuff gets totally insane at the higher levels. And because there's always room to optimize, improve, and build a better factory, there's always something to do. It's super addictive for people with the brains to handle this kind of thing, and one of the easiest games out there to lose thousands of hours playing. A quick bonus for you, like Skyrim, it's in the bonus section because it doesn't really require a lot of explaining. It's obvious. People can and will dedicate hundreds of hours just screwing around in the base game, but if you really want to spend some time with Skyrim, there's an almost infinite amount of mods to try. Sure, you end up spending most of that 1,000 hours just trying to configure everything so that the mods actually work, but when everything finally comes together, it's super satisfying for at least a few minutes before you get back into the mod manager to try out something else, you know? The Binding of Isaac Repentance, ton of great roguelikes out there that are easy to put tons of hours into, but if you want to play one of these games for the long haul, probably the one with the most stuff is this game, The Binding of Isaac. It's an action roguelike that's sort of a mix between top-down shooter and one of the old 16-bit Legend of Zelda games. Concept very simple. You wander around randomly generated dungeons, get money, get upgrades, take on bosses. Sounds like a game that wouldn't have a lot to keep players hooked, but this game has been getting updated for years at this point, and every big update it includes a ton of new characters, upgrades, levels, bosses. At this point, the amount of stuff to do in Binding of Isaac is just crazy. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.